All right, we're going to go ahead and get started here. Tonight, we're going to go over the Rangelands Project. So the Rangelands Project really it focused around the lesson on rangelands, and really the objectives. If you completed the lesson, if you complete the project, really want you to have a solid understanding of what a grassland, a rangeland, and a pasture are. So being able to define those three terms, describe the uses of rangelands, describing the effects that overgrazing has on these areas, and then finally being able to identify possible management practices for rangelands and their specific environmental implications that they may have. So, before we get into that, I just want to take a few minutes, just talk to you about some key points in the lesson that'll help you with the project. So when you take a look at the rangelands specifically, okay, really humans have had really great impacts on grasslands. Okay, so urban sprawl, mining, poor land use management practices, invasive species, and pollution really have been the bane, of American grasslands. Okay, and when you when you talk about the conversion of grasslands to agricultural land, it really came about with the invention of the steel plow. Grasslands could be converted to farmland, and then these grasslands were really put into a transitionary phase with the signing of the Homestead Act. In fact, after forests, grasslands are our ecosystem's most affected area of the planet. Okay, so when we think about making changes to these areas, which are vital parts to food production system, we need to make sure that things like grazing, for example, don't destroy grasses because remember your lesson discussed how vital these resources are in terms of creating these additional farmlands. So when you talk about environmental issues, okay, even though farming grasslands have helped us produce a lot of food, it hasn't come without costs. So think about topics like plowing. Plowing has made the area more prone to erosions during droughts, and how cattle has ranched has led to increased stress on our grasslands. And really, the conversion of farmland destroys these ecosystems, and it replaces the native plants of the area with you know resources that we do need to survive, like corn and wheat and soybean and crops. However, these agricultural practices end up stripping the nutrients from the soil, and they further displace and harm the organisms that are actually intended to live there. So that's an issue. Plant invasion by non-native species is an issue. Overgrazing is an issue. So just some things to think about when we're talking about sustaining grasslands and sustaining rangelands. Um, you know, we really need to take a look at how to restore what's already been disturbed. Okay, those losses of native soil and vegetation, the introduction of non-native species, the impacts on water and quality, the loss of habitat, of wildlife habitat, and really the interruption of natural cycles. We need to take a look at actions to restore those disturbed grasslands to their natural state, so that we can return our habitats back to really a natural condition. So, with that, let's take a minute here and take a look at this project. So, when you look at the directions, and I just want to read them briefly and go over them. So, in an effort to express concern over the effects of overgrazing, some people refer to grazed grasslands as cow deserts. Okay. Um, the project is asking you to write a 300-word report to explain how grasslands can become like a desert by the action of livestock. Okay. Um, Cows, for example. Then explain how farmers can practice sustainable use of the rangeland to prevent serious environmental harm to grasslands. Give three specific reasons why this can be done. And then finally, explain how your individual life would be directly or indirectly affected if all of American rangelands were distributed or were disturbed to the point that they could no longer be used. So, some stuff we've actually just talked about here, stuff that's discussed in your lesson. Um, so, the guidelines are approximately 60% of the grade depends on the explanation of how overgrazing can lead to desert like conditions, and about 25% of your lesson depends upon your discussion and your rationale of how your lifestyle would be affected by the loss of the rangeland. Okay, so you can do this in a Word document. You can do this again. You can do this in the box below. But what it goes over, and there are 3 points. First, it asks you to explain how overgrazing can lead to desert-like conditions. So again, I would suggest going back into the lesson if you're unfamiliar and look up that area on overgrazing and summarize that for me. 3 to 4 sentences um, about what overgrazing leads to in terms of the rangeland. That's the first part. Second part, 3 examples of how farmers can practice sustainable use of rangeland to prevent serious environmental harms. Okay, so again, going back to the points that we discussed um, in how to reduce, okay, or restoring disturbed rangelands. Okay, give me 3 specific examples on how to do that. Okay, and that's the second part to the question. And then the third part, explain how your individual life would be directly or indirectly affected if all America's rangelands were disturbed to the point that they could no longer be used. Okay, so what I'm looking for here is think about um, what we discussed about loss of biodiversity. Think about the loss of nutrient rich topsoil and how that affects farming, which how that affects you both directly and indirectly. Um, and that's what I would be looking for in the third part to this assignment. Okay, so 3 parts to this. Um, you can certainly use outside sources. If you use an outside source, please make sure that you cite it. But I don't see any reason why you couldn't find all of the answers using the lesson in Odysseyware for this project. And if you have any other additional problems that you're coming up with while you're doing this, please don't hesitate to come into the virtual office or email me during the week. I'll be more than happy to help you. And we'll be back here again next week going over another project. And as we're wrapping up here, just quick little note: make sure that you're just keeping up with your assignments. And if there's anything that I can help you with, I'd be more than happy to do that. And have a great week, everyone.